And Ablat Gemara. Today's daf is daf Samachei. And yesterday we learned that from the Rosh Chodesh Nisan, they made a big party finally when they won the Baisusim debate regarding the Korban Tummy they brought every day, whether you can use private funds for it or not. And now we had another issue regarding Shavuos, which is a discussion right now. Yeah, exactly that. We're up to Gemara Samachei and Aleph towards the bottom of the page. And we discussed whether we don't fast on those days and perhaps we don't make eulogies, or we just don't fast. Says the Gemara about 7 lines about him. The last word of the line is Va'ad. From the 8th day of Nisan until the very end of the Yom Tov V'Toysiv, they established Chagad the Shvoya, the Yom Tov of Shavuos, the Leil Misped. According to our version of your mother, you don't make a hesped, you don't eulogize, which according to Rashi's shop means if you don't eulogize, surely you don't fast. Rashi's version actually is you just don't fast. He says the simcha for establishing Shavuos, or the challenge was less than the challenge for the Korban Tummy because their proof was very weak. So in the Baisusim say, Atzedes, that's interesting. Sometimes we have the Baisusim argument with the Chazal, sometimes it's Lukim, and they're not the same. There's a difference between the two and their approaches to how to understand the Torah, which talk for another time. The Basusim said it's Atzeres Achar Shabbos. Shavuos always fall on a Sunday. Nitful lehem rayichem engage with them. He says them shaitim. He called them fools. Minayin lechem. Where do you get this from? No, they were all intimidated, or nobody knew. There's one older person, yeah, he was prepared to argue with him. His belligerent Rambam. Look what he says here. He was part of the union here. Moshe Rabbeinu oiv Yisrael. Moshe loved Jews. He knew that Shavuos is only one day. So Amad v'tikna achar Shabbos. You know, can you imagine having a long weekend? You have Shabbos a day off, and you have Sunday a day off. Look at this. This is the idea of having a long weekend. He said Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, it was Moshe Rabbeinu's idea. That's what he's saying here. The whole idea is Moshe Rabbeinu's idea. Rabbi Yechon Zakir then said, "You think Moshe Rabbeinu loved the Yidden?" So he not that he's saying he doesn't, but he's saying you think that he's the one who made the mitzvahs and he did whatever he did for that Kodesh Baruch Hu. I'll prove it to you. It says Achad we had in the volume Achad also Moshe Rabbeinu was admonishing the Yidden. He said 11 days he could have traveled from Chaydev through Hasei, and instead we went 40 years. That's the Rashi learns here. Rashi Chumash takes the quotes here. Rashi Chumash says, however, but he went much further than that. It should have taken 11 days to go from Chaydev through by Hasei, but the Eibusha made a nest and did it in 3 days. Mamash was so enthusiastic about getting there, and look what happened. We're here 40 years. Now, the Moshe Rabbeinu no, if you think that Moshe Rabbeinu made all the decisions himself, then what kind of Yisrael is he if he delayed it? Obviously, whatever he did came from the Rebbeinu Shalom. And sure, it's nothing to do with long weekends. So that's your whole raya that I'm wrong. Amalei Shaita. He said, "Fool, don't think that our Torah is like your nonsense. You waffle and you bring flimsy proofs. Our Torah is solid. I'll prove it to you from the Torah itself. Now, that Shavuos has nothing to do with Sunday. That you start counting Sfira the second day of Pesach. Kosovek, we have a contradiction of two psukim. Kosovek, in one pasuk it says until Abd Mochas Shabbos, till the day after Shabbos, which is their whole proof. Mochas Shabbos is Sunday. You should count 50 days. Sounds like you're counting 50 days. The Kosovek, another pasuk says Sheva Shabbos is the end. You only count 7 whole weeks. Which one is it? One pasuk talks about days, and one pasuk talks about weeks. In other words, sometimes you're counting only days, and sometimes you're counting weeks. If Pesach happens to fall on a Shabbos, so the first day of counting is Sunday, then you have 7 weeks. If Pesach falls out in the middle of the week, and you start counting the following day, then you're only counting days, not full weeks. Okay, so if Yom falls on Shabbos, then Sunday makes you weeks. During the week, then the counting is, you don't have whole weeks, it's only days. So Taisa is already, it said, but the Poil it says Tishba Chamishim Yom. It says counting 50 days, we only count 49. So Taisa said the pasuk is saying here, Ad Memachel Shabbos, until Memachel Shabbos you should count.
Ad Bichlal.
No, say until then you count. And why? Because the following day is Chamishim, is 50th day. Or the pshat is that you count the 49 days because on the and put a break after the word tispru, and chamishim yemi krafte michal Hashem. On the 50th day, I want you to bring the bikurim and all that, or the shtei lech and all that. That's how Taisus understands the pasuk. Okay, then Gemara continues. We're going to bring now a whole series of rayas to prove that Shavuot, that you start counting the second day of Pesach. Says the Gemara.
Engaged with this goes so much.
Yeah, but Chaim Brusker Gutnick once told the story. He asked Moshe Feinstein, how come we find Rebbe Mazaka engaging them by Susim, and we having all the time, they're having these the talks, and you and the Lubavitch Rebbe continuously, you're not allowed to have you're not allowed to be on a dialogue together with Reform rabbis. Reform rabbis are like the Stukim by Susim. So how come? So Ramesha said to him like this. He says, in those days, Rabbi Yechim Mazaka engaged because when the Eden saw Atzduki take the mayim on Sukkot, the kohen, he took the water, he poured it down his foot instead of down the safol. So what happened? Zorku ha'ambas again. The average person knew it was wrong, so they took the esrogim and they bombarded him with esrogim. He says today the average Yid doesn't know the difference between one rabbi and the next rabbi. And if the people are not going to throw the esrogim, it's the job of the rabbanim to throw the esrogim. Someone has to throw esrogim. Anyway, Lezer says, "Einu tzarich." Don't need a contradiction to psukim within the pasuk itself. Harim it says, "It says in the pasuk. One pasuk it says you should count for yourself. Shiva Shavuos Tispalach. You should count loch, count for yourself. And lashon yachid. So who's lashon yachid? The bezin has to count. Shehem yoidel chadash. They know when Chodesh Chodesh is. And Menachos Shabbos means Menachos Yom Tov. So it must be that Menachos Shabbos means a day. Shabbos doesn't mean Shabbos, it means Yom Tov. Yotza Shabbos Bereishis, because Shabbos Bereishis, you need a bezin. Shesfirasa b'chalotim. Everybody knows when bezin. You have to ask a bezin. The Rashba says doesn't mean literally you have to go ask a bezin. It means that you watch other people, but how do they know? Because bezin put out proclamation that the Menachos Chodesh is. For Shabbos, you don't need a bezin. Where you wherever you are, the days of the week. So the pasuk itself tells you the Menachos Shabbos here means Menachos Yom Tov. Rabbi Yeshua, another ayah. Rabbi Yeshua says, now the Gemara later will slug up all these ayahs. Yeshua says, Amra, Rabbi Yeshua says the Torah says, it says elsewhere that you count the days to make Rosh Chodesh. So we make a binyan av. And then it says over here, go ahead and count days and make Shavuos. You know exactly when the Chodesh is because there's no moon anymore and there's just now the Moiled. Is af atzedes, so too, and you know which day the Chodesh is after 29 days, after 30 days. Af atzedes, so too when it comes to Shavuos, samuch lebiyasa nikeres. You have to be able to be nikah which day of the month it is. Which day of the month it is. Because if you're going to follow that it means Menachos Shabbos, every year will be a different day of the month. Because, if Shabbos falls on, if Yom Tov falls on Shabbos, then it's the 16th. If Yom Tov falls on a Friday, it's the 17th, and so on. It's not a fixed day. You can argue that what Shavuos is always on a Sunday. Hey, how can you recognize the day of the month? How can you recognize the day of the month? Taisha says, but that recognize the day in the month, recognize the size of the moon. Just like when it comes to Kiddush HaChodesh, you know exactly the size of the moon. It's non-existent. It's nascent. So too, when it comes to Yom Tov, says Taisus, you'd go out there, look at the size of the moon on the 5th day of Nisan, let's say, whatever the 5th day. You know exactly what the moon looks like. So when it comes to Shavuos, you look in the sky. You recognize the situation, the position of the moon, exactly what size it should be. Next raya. That's Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Shmuel says, Torah says, says you have to bring a korban Ayman on Pesach, and the conclusion of that korban, the culmination of that, this is Bali, you work your way up to Chitim, which is on Shavuos. Wait, Ma'alahalan regel with regel, just like when it comes to Shavuos, you bring it on Yom Tov itself, and the beginning of Yom Tov, when you bring Shteilech at the beginning, even though Tesa says there's only one day Yom Tov. What do you mean beginning of Yom Tov? There's only one day Yom Tov. So he says, well, no, but you have Meluyim, you have Tashlumin, you can do it for 7 days. Avkan the regel with regel. So over here, it has to be the Ayman has to be on Yom Tov and the beginning of the Yom Tov. But if you're going to if you always fix it on a Sunday, sometimes it's the beginning of Yom Tov, if Yom Tov falls on a Shabbos. Sometimes it'll be middle of Yom Tov. Sometimes it'll be after Yom Tov. If Yom Tov falls on Sunday and you agree it has to be Menachos Shabbos, you can do it the following Sunday. Yom Tov's over already. So it's not. That's how we know. That's Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda says it says Shabbos L'mayla. It says Shabbos L'mayla. It says you should count Menachos Shabbos That's one pasuk. Svat lechem mochel Shabbos, and it says Shabbos l'mayla, and it says ad b'mochel Shabbos ashvi tizpru. Remember Shabbos sorry. L'mayla is what's before and what's after. Is mal lahalim. When it says the pasuk later, it says this is the next pasuk. First pasuk says it's five lechem mochel Shabbos. You should count mochel Shabbos. That's l'mayla, and the next pasuk says ad b'mochel Shabbos ashvi tizpru. That's the lamata. That's the next pasuk. That's what it says. You bring that Shavuos. Start with Pesach, you finish with Shavuos. So the Nemer Shabbos Lamaila, Nemer Shabbos Lamata, and it says Shabbos when Admiral Shabbos. Mala Halan Regel because Regel Samachla, just like over there, Yom Tov beginning Yom Tov. Akan Regel because Regel Samachla. Same, similar to the one before. It was five to the You should count to yourself. The Rajba, another Shem Ashkari, how do you see the word Lachem that every single Yid has a mitzvah to count? Forget Lachem sound like plural. The one person counts on behalf of everybody. Yeah. So one of the answers is it could have just said Osfartim. You count. Lachem is an extra word. And therefore we learn the Esfilu Chalech Bechad. That's why in Shlomo it says in Petez you shouldn't be Svida. Everyone has a chiv to count Svida. So Tosfos is an interesting thing here. By Yovel, there's a mitzvah to the Bezna should count the years of Yovel. And Tosfos said maybe they make a bracha as well, like we make a bracha on Sfira. And then Tosfos has a question. So how come a Zova, the only other mitzvah that is counting is a woman has to count the 7 days, the clean days? How come we don't find that she has to make a bracha? She has a mitzvah counting like we have a mitzvah counting for Sfira. So Tosfos says, because what happens if she sees dam in the middle, then she has to start again. So it's a bracha v'atola. So from here they bring a raya that Sfiras Ha'omer is not one mitzvah, but every day is a separate mitzvah. Otherwise you have the same problem as Ha'omer. If you hold Sfiras Ha'omer as one long mitzvah, and we say if you miss out a day, we'll talk about it more tomorrow. If you miss out a day, you don't continue counting. So how do you make a bracha? And how do you make a bracha every day? But how do you make a bracha al bracha? Maybe you won't make the whole. You should make a bracha till you get to the last day, so you know that you did the mitzvah, because maybe you'll be Easter. The other ones answer no. Not the pshat is that every day is a separate mitzvah. There's one mitzvah every day. Whatever you did. It's just the mitzvah continues, just like in Krishma. If you said v'ahavta, you still did the mitzvah v'ahavta. As the Babit in Kir Sefer explained, the mitzvah matayis will be the entire 3 parshas. But if you read one parsha, you also did mitzvah matayis. Just the mitzvah continues. Same here. Anyway, so the mitzvah every person to count. The Menachos Yom Tov. It said Menachos Shabbos. It means Menachos Yom Tov. Oh yeah, Menachos Shabbos maybe means Sunday. So we have another. The B'rais will bring a whole bunch of answers as well. Some of the similar before, some different. It says it should always be 50 days. Now this one is a hard one. The Gemara itself will ask the question later. It seems to be learning that you always, even if you're starting to count from Sunday, you still has to be 50 days from the second day of Pesach. And the Gemara later on says why. I'm sorry? That's why it doesn't work out. That's the proof that Mochel Shabbat will be the second, because it has to be fixed always 50 days. And we're going to ask, who says that you have to be 50? Who says that it has to be 50 days from the second day of Pesach? Maybe 50 days from when you start counting. And whenever you start. So if Sunday, you always start on Sunday. In other words, the Gemara will say, don't understand the design. But anyway, this is what he says here. It says teach count 50 days. Called Sfiras and safe no matter when you start, it should always be 50 days from the second day of Pesach. If you say Sunday, sometimes 51 days. It depends. Pesach is Friday, Thursday, Wednesday. It keeps on adding. Even though you're going to start counting physically from Sunday, but from the second day of Pesach, it's many more days. 56. Rabbi Yeshua Hudam said, "Ain't the tzaddik don't have to." It says, "Tispelecha." It says, "Tispelecha." We had even said it before that it said a different word altogether. So some say maybe it's Rabbi Yeshua Beseder, some say it's Rabbi Yehuda without the word Beseder. It says, "Tispelecha." You should count Svida Tuluya Bebezen. It's a Svida that we need to rely on Bezen. Now, if it's Sunday, what do you need Bezen for? You have to Shabbat Bereishis. Everyone knows how to count. Like similar to what I had before. Rabbi Yisrael says, "Menachos Shabbos, Menachos Yom Tov." Means Menachos Yom Tov. Yom Tov. Menachos Yom Tov, Menachos Shabbos Bereishis. Maybe means Sunday. Amra means V'chidnei Menachos Shabbos Shebetor Pesach. And if it now if it means this Menachos Shabbos, and what do you mean? It means in middle of Pesach. It means Sunday, right? The Sunday middle of Pesach. All it says is Menachos Shabbos. I know which Shabbos are 52 Shabbosim in the year. No mention of Pesach in that pasuk. Is Haloy Nemen Menachos Shabbos. The Chol Hashana Kulam Lei Shabbosis. The Torah is not telling you when. if all it says Machal Shabbos and you tell me Shabbos means just Shabbos Bereshis, and how do you know which Shabbos it is? And so maybe it's like counting from the middle of Shabbos Pashas Noach. How do you know? So say you, but like Ezer Shabbos. So it must be the Machal Shabbos means Machal Yom Tov Pesach. Boy, another reason is Nemla Shabbos Lamata Shalom Ayla we just had before. Mala Halon Regel because by Shavuos when it says over there that Machal Shabbos Ashvi Tisper will be Krafta Mincha. It means on Yom Tov and beginning Yom Tov Chil Regel Avkan Regel Chil Regel. So too when it comes to the counting, with Svartel Lechem Machal Shabbos it means on Yom Tov in the beginning. But if you do Sunday, sometimes it's after Yom Tov, so the middle Yom Tov. Now Shimon Lazar says Kosav Echad. One pasuk says Sheishes Yomim Techel Matzis. 6 days you have to eat matzahs. Because of echad oimeshivas yamim matzah 7 days. Now in Gemara Pesachim we learn from Teisus V'Yaluz as well that mashvi rishus avshishi rishus. We learn now that you don't have to eat matzah the whole yom tov except bad of Teichel matzah at night. The Chazkuni says you mekayim mitzvah say, but there's no chiv. But here we're going to give it a different shot. And Teisus says maybe we can learn two things from this pasuk. Ha Ketzad, what do you mean? 6 or 7 days. So matzah she ata yochel echel shiva min achodesh. There is matzah that you can only eat for 6 days, and the matzah you can eat 7 days. If it's yashan old crop, you can eat for 7 days. If it's the new crop, you can only eat for 6 days. Why can only eat for 6 days? Because when do you bring the omer? I'm saying the yom tov. That's how we know it. Always machal Shabbos saying the yom tov. Ad yochel echel shisha min achodesh.
Oh, I mean, you have a chiyuv b'achilas matzah on first day Yom Tov. But if you can't eat it because you have to wait for the matzah.
They eat Yasha number 1, number 2. If you remember that,
But what if this is?
you remember the Teisus in Lamecheste and Kedushin asked the question, why don't we say the mitzvah asay of be'eretz echel matzahs is doiche the loises of the Isra of Chodesh? And one of the answers is we're scared you'll eat more than a kazais. No, the chiyuv. Oh no, all you have to eat is the one kazais. So the asay you already finished when you ate your kazayis.
Anything more than that is over.
Exactly, which is the problem with the cheskuni and the Vilna Gaon who say there's a mitzvah to eat. For every bite you eat, you can become a mitzvah, and we know that key mitzvah maybe also deichel loisasa. So how come what's Teisus' problem? But this gives another answer. So maybe that goof is the machlekes of to answer Teisus. Anyway, that's in Kedushin of Lameches. Okay, now it starts a new thing. The day that you bring tisper, you should count. From the day, it says from the day that you bring the it says here, Shabbos, you bring as Omer Hatnufa, the Omer Sheva Shabbos. What do you mean, Miyayim Haviachim? From the day that you bring. So at tisper, you should count. Miyayim Haviachim, you should count. That's what it sounds like. Miyayim Haviachim. So you start counting from that day, the second day Yom Tov. Yachol Yikzer, our thing I can harvest. The Yavim bring it. Of the Emes Yitzer Yisper. Doesn't say when it says in the pasuk was far to the Chem and Machal Shabbos. Then it's a Miyam Aviyachas Omer. Does it say that you have to count only after you bring the Omer? Maybe after bring the Omer, but maybe 2 days later, 3 days later. How do I know? It says another pasuk. When should you count? When you start cutting down with a sickle from when it is standing upright. I should start counting. Counting. So I was like this. You have to harvest. The Yisper counts straight away. Because the pasuk is written really before the word Miyam. I was on harvest and start counting straight away. But when do you actually have to bring physically the carbon? Whenever you want. You don't really start counting unless Miyam Aviyachim. Okay, when are you going to bring the carbon? Only by day. So maybe you can do everything by day. It has to be Tamimis. Tamimis is only if you start at night. You have to count at night, otherwise it's missing half a day. So you have to count at night. You have to be kaitzer at night, but the havayachin, you bring the carbon during the day. So Yochal would thought that they would say, maybe also you have to consider It sounds like you start counting after you bring the carbon, and you just prove that you have to count at night. So maybe you have to harvest at night. Maybe you have to what do you call it? Bring the carbon at night. It's an exception. We're going to bring it at night. And then you start counting. You bring it by day. So, okay, so what's going on here? So this is what we do. You cut and you count at night. But when you bring the carbon by day. being carved by day. And we'll talk more about this. Because we learn all the Nisuda from here. Let's do a few more. Every night we brought over here can be repudiated. Besides the last two Tanoim, Beimi Mastita in the Kamaisa in the first Braisa, Beimi Mastita Braisa in the second Braisa. The less Lepicha, it's iron, and you can't undermine it. Even Rabbi Yechim said the contradiction of Psukim 50 days in Shabbos. Maybe the reason why one pasuk says count 50 days and one pasuk says you only count 7 weeks is not a stira. Remember, Abaye said that two mitzvahs. Abaye mitzvah lemem neyema or mitzvah lemem neshuas. A mitzvah to count days and the mitzvah to count shuas. Yeah, look at that. Good friends. But no, he doesn't argue here. On this thing, he doesn't argue. It's not like so. Yeah, you're right. I have a number of times where they defend each other. Now, it's a machlekes in the shaynim whether it's mamish two separate mitzvahs or it's one mitzvah, but it's two psukim. So it's a mitzvah to count the days, and a mitzvah to count the weeks. Big machlekes in the shaynim when you say count the weeks, does it mean the end of every week you say hayom shvu echad shvuos, or the way we do it today? We say shmeina yamim shein shvu echad v'yom echad omer. So every single day we count the week as well. That's a machlekes here. If you learn it's one mitzvah, then it makes more sense to count every day of the week as well. But if you learn it's two separate mitzvahs altogether, then why are you counting on the 8th day of the week? It's it's only part of a week. So then the mitzvah would only be the end of the week. That's how you can explain that machlekes. If we're going to follow the view of Rabbi Lezer who says that Ma'aser with Bezdin, we need Bezdin, Tismach Bezdin, or Rabbi Yeshua, who says that Torah says you compare it to Chodesh, you count days, and you have to know. You're right. Has to be Yom Tov. Remember that Pesach has a first day Yom Tov and a last day Yom Tov. Maybe it means the last day Yom Tov you start counting, right? Because you start counting then. Did Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseda, Rabbi Shmuel, who said that the Torah says bring oimen shtei lechem and the same thing, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseda less lupicha. For Rabbi Shmuel. And Rabbi Shmuel, who compared it not to Chodesh, count days in Chodesh, but Rabbi Shmuel said we compare it to Shavuos, and just like Shavuos, it's the beginning of Yom Tov. Over here also the beginning of Yom Tov, so you can't ask me, maybe it's the last day of Yom Tov, because we're comparing it to Shavuos. Then you have a raya. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseda, who also said Shabbos L'mayla and Shabbos L'mata, the same thing, just like the beginning of Yom Tov. They're both saying more or less the same thing. So the beginning of Yom Tov can't be the last day, it's clear. So let's do Picha, no question. If Rabbi Yehuda, I would have thought, now if it's the Rabbi Yehuda who said that you should always be 50 days, as if to say you have to have 50 days from the second day of Pesach. So who said you have to have 50 days from the second day of Pesach? 50 days means from the beginning of counting. And if you always count on Sunday, like they say, Machal Shabbos, then maybe 50 days from that is good enough. If it's Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseda who says that again, Ma'aser Bezdin, we have to count the Bezdin, fine. I might have been the same question before. Who said it means the first day Yom Tov? You're right, you have to rely on Bezdin. But how do you know which part of the Yom Tov you have to rely on? Rabbi Yossi himself, who said, what do you call it? We don't know which Shabbos it is, also saw that we could ask the question. I know the first day Yom Tov, maybe it's the last day Yom Tov. That's why he brings another proof, the Shabbos L'mayla, Shabbos L'mata, because there it means Tchilas Regel. Right, and that's the only two proofs that we have. We'll stop here and we'll continue to